Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I'm Ashley Willingham, a sinner saved by grace, and an author of clean Christian fantasy romance books filled with adult characters, action, adventure, on-page prayer, and God's truths. You're listening to the free serialized audiobook for Ink and Ivy, my cozy Christian fantasy romance, Book One in the Gracehaven series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless and enjoy.
Chapter 29. The lilting, ambient melody of the string quartet trailed into silence as Mr. Vael led her to join the dancers already arranging themselves into long parallel lines, gentlemen facing ladies. As Ivy took her place opposite the elven man, a few paces down the line, a flash of purple caught her eye. Daphne and Felix were taking their places, with Marigold and Bastian just beside them. Daphne's gaze snagged on hers, eyes flying wide as she flicked a glance toward the sight of Mr. Vael standing opposite her. The fawn's mouth fell open. Over the lively din of conversation and tuning instruments, she mouthed without sound, "Is he—" Ivy frantically shook her head. No, absolutely not. Caelen Vael was not Fern. He simply couldn't be. Determined to prove it, she tore her gaze away from her friend and skimmed the sea of onlookers gathered at the edges of the gallery, contenting themselves with watching the dancing about to begin. Her eyes snagged on a few unfamiliar gentlemen who seemed to be watching her with passing interest. There was a handsome sky fae leaning against a pillar, his folded, feathered wings framing his sharply cut tailcoat. A few paces away stood a wood elf in a finely embroidered waistcoat of mossy green that matched perfectly with his equally verdant hair. And further still, a dark-haired man she almost mistook for a human like Felix, dressed smartly in a dark coat and buff breeches, before she caught the unmistakable swish of a black wolf tail trailing behind his legs. Could any of them be him? A spark of doubt smouldered in her heart. She thought back to the elegant script of Fern's latest letter. The words burned into her memory. "I will claim your first dance." If any one of those strangers was truly her secret admirer, then why had they not stepped forward? Why had they simply stood by and watched from the shadows, letting Mr. Vael strike first and sweep her away? The hum of the opening chord echoed through the gallery, forcing Ivy to abandon her frantic search. She snapped her attention back to her dance partner. Mr. Vael met her gaze head-on, watching her just as he had been nearly all evening, intensely, unblinking, his brilliant diamond-hard gaze glittering beneath the candlelight. The line surged forward. Ivy glided with the beat, raising her gloved hand to meet his. The moment their palms pressed together, that startling warmth flared again, shooting straight past the layers of kid leather and silk. Setting her jaw, she endeavored to ignore it.
"You seem displeased,"
the elven man breathed within that nearness, his words lacking all inflection, the cool observation of a scholar. Thinning her lips, she corrected him. "I am not displeased," as they turned in a graceful, sweeping circle and traded places. But still, his unblinking stare lingered on, as if he could see straight through her to the unspoken words still burning on her tongue. Without thinking, she blurted out, "I am simply confused." Mr. Vail's eyebrow twitched. Her stomach lurched at the sight. What was she saying? Why was she confessing anything at all to him and encouraging his curiosity? She should just smile and make idle chatter about the weather, the decorations, the music, the gracefulness of his dancing. No, she didn't need to mention that last one either.
"And am I the source of your confusion, Miss Fairwood?"
He just had time to ask before they parted again, stepping backward into their respective lines. Ivy bit the inside of her cheek, swallowing back her initial sharp retort. Of course he was. Why would she not be confused by his sudden desire to dance with her? Nor the way he seemed to be determined to be rude to her one moment, and then trying to gift her his pocket watch the next. But it wasn't all his fault, to be fair. Fern, her absent admirer, was partially to blame for her confusion too. Perhaps Fern was simply delayed. That quiet part of her mind suggested. Perhaps he intends to arrive later and will apologize then. She clung to that thought like a lifeline, even as the dance brought her sweeping back together with Mr. Vail, their hands joining for a swift turn. His fingers handled hers with great care, as if she were a woman made from porcelain and he feared he might break her. She forced another smile to her lips and a honeyed sweetness to her tone. "Of course not, Mr. Vail. Why would I ever find your mannerisms to be confusing?" His fingers pressed a fraction tighter against hers for a brief moment, though his features remained carved from stone, perfectly unreadable.
"Your sarcasm does not escape me, Miss Fairwood,"
he remarked, his voice a cool murmur, so at odds with the lively music.
"No doubt you find me just as confusing as I sometimes find you. I was rather surprised, after all, to have my Elodie return my watch to me in such a fashion."
The dance dictated they break apart again. Ivy spun around the gentleman beside her, guilt flaring in her heart at the reminder of how she had used poor Elodie. A guilt she swiftly tried to snuff out. Why should she feel guilty for returning a gift he never should have given her in the first place? She should have returned it herself, to be sure, without involving Elodie. But there was nothing inherently wrong with her having returned it. The pattern of the dance pulled them down the centre of the line, shoulder to shoulder.
"If my gift brought offence,"
he murmured, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Your gift did not offend me, Mr. Vail." She hurriedly expelled beneath her breath, the words tumbling forth before her mind had a chance to decide if uttering them was a good idea or not. "I simply did not wish to be beholden to you further." His gaze sliced toward her sidelong, his brow furrowing. Breath hitching, she hurriedly parted from him and wove around the next couple. What had gotten into her this evening? She had to escape from him before she said something else completely rude and yet utterly true, and earned for herself a proper enemy. A powerful enemy, no less. How had her life become so complicated so quickly? Her gaze skimmed across the edges of the crowd. She simply had to find Fern. Fern was familiar, safe. The choreography of the dance swept her back to her partner's side, standing shoulder to shoulder with him a second time. Their hands met once more. And that all too familiar scent of ink and dark chocolate washed over her, making her head swim. This time she kept her gaze firmly fixed forward, refusing to meet his. Bog cabbage and wild ramps. Bog cabbage and wild ramps.
"Even though I reassured you that I expected nothing from you in return,"
he finally murmured, shattering the growing silence.
"Still, you assume the worst of me."
Such words, uttered so calmly, still lashed against her, making her wince. Because he was right. For all that she had chanted Matthew 22:39 to herself, like a mantra on more than one occasion where this man was concerned, still she had not shown him Christianly love. She swallowed hard, no longer sure what to say. Not that it mattered. Mr. Vail didn't give her much opportunity to speak at all.
"Perhaps, Miss Fairwood, my gift was just that. A gift,"
he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper.
"Perhaps I observed that your lack of an internal clock seems to vex you on occasion and sought to offer you a solution. Perhaps I offered you my watch because I thought it might make life a little easier for you."
The steps of the dance brought them face to face yet again, except this time the impenetrable marble of his expression finally fractured. Though the rigid, flawless posture of the Veritas gentleman remained, his ice-blue eyes now blazed with a suppressed fire. Irritation, frustration, and something else. An emotion that made her heart skip a beat, even though she had no word with which to describe it. Under the sheer weight of his attention, the crowded gallery simply ceased to be. The swirling silks of the other dancers, the warm glow of the chandeliers, the lively plucking of the string quartet, all of it melted away into a muffled, distant blur. Within a ballroom packed with hundreds of guests, the world had narrowed down to the span of a few inches. Simply to him. Her chest seized, the air completely stalled in her throat. No man had ever looked at her like that before.
"Perhaps I gave you my watch simply because I wanted to,"
he finished on a heated exhale. Ivy missed the next beat of music completely, her foot scuffing against the floor. His hand tightened faintly on hers as she stumbled to a pause before him, just standing there while the dance continued all around them. Because I wanted to. But why? She heard herself ask as if from far away. The words were barely audible over the racing of her own heart, the rush of blood within her ears. She twitched away from him by a single step, prying her hand from his. His long fingers instantly curled inward, flexing against the empty air as though he were actively wrestling with the urge to pull her right back. And suddenly, she was a woman standing on the edge of a precipice, gazing down into a new, terrifying unknown. A part of her wished to run, to retreat before she could fall off that cliff completely. But another part forced her to lift her chin, to meet his gloriously blue eyes as she pressed. Why would you want to make my life easier, Mr. Vael? Why would you care? He simply stared at her now, that muscle in his jaw feathering once more. The lively music swelled, the dance slowly drawing to a close. The other couples continued to part and flow around them like water around two stones in a stream. And still there they stood. The distinct hiss of curious whispers began to rise. The prickle of so many stares bore into her back. She should have been mortified. They were causing a scene, but she couldn't move. She could hardly breathe. All she could do was remain there with Mr. Vael, utterly transfixed as the man tipped his head closer to hers and whispered,
And here I thought it was obvious.
Chapter 30. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ivy's lips parted, and yet no sound emerged. She stood frozen as her mind scrambled to unravel the impossibility of just what he was trying to tell her, that he, Caelen Vael, against all odds, might care for her. But surely not. Why would he? What reason had she ever given him to encourage such a misplaced affection? This must have been some mistake, a cruel jest perhaps. As if in agreement, the melody of the string quartet abruptly fractured. A swell of startled voices unfurled within the quiet, originating near the entrance to the gallery. All around them, the remaining dancers faltered. The discordant scrape of a bow against a violin string echoed through the room. A collective murmur of confusion rippled amongst them as every head in the gallery turned toward the grand double doors. With a sharp intake of breath, Ivy pried her gaze away from the magnetic, consuming pull of Mr. Vail's stare and craned her neck to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing such a disturbance. What in Luminara was happening? Through a break in the press of bodies, she spotted a brief glimpse of white, silver and black, all gently glowing, like stars glimmering against the night sky. A bright voice cut through the rising noise. Elodie, joyously crying, "Uncle Orevan, Uncle Lucien, Aunt Lysandra!" But the girl's excitement was immediately met with a sharp reply, a woman's voice as melodious as a bell, yet as cutting as a shard of broken glass. "Elodie Vael, when will you learn? An heiress does not shout." Ivy's frown deepened. Who would dare scold sweet Elodie so publicly, so cruelly? Beside her, Mr. Vael went utterly still, his hands tightening into fists. "More cousins of yours?" she hissed sidelong, remembering Elodie's chatter from the dinner at Grandma Evelyn's. Mr. Vael had only one true brother, but a cousin Orevan she was to call uncle all the same. Perhaps this Lucien and Lysandra were yet more of the same. Perhaps the Vael family tree was overrun with rude cousins. But Mr. Vael did not answer her question. Instead, his hand shot out, gloved fingers clamped around hers, not with the polite, gentle grace of a dance partner, but with a sudden, unyielding grip. A startled gasp snagged in Ivy's throat as he abruptly wheeled her around, leaving her staring up into his face, his sharp, marble-like features locked in their usual mask of cold indifference once more. "Mr. Vael!" was all she had time to protest before he, without a single word of explanation, pulled her into motion, forging a swift path in the exact opposite direction from the gallery entrance. They hit the surge of the crowd immediately, while the rest of the party pressed eagerly toward the doors, craning their necks for a glimpse of the newcomers. Mr. Vael dragged her against the tide. Ivy stumbled, her copper silk skirts tangling around her ankles as she blindly navigated a chaotic sea of jostling elbows and swishing fabrics. And suddenly, the grip of his hand upon hers utterly vanished. For one frantic heartbeat, she flailed. But before the panic could fully take root, the chaos jarring her from all sides abruptly ebbed. A sweeping, solid warmth enveloped her as Mr. Vail's arm wrapped securely around her waist and drew her flush against the sheltering strength of his side. The sheer, scandalous intimacy of the gesture stole what scant breath remained in her lungs. To be held so publicly by a gentleman who was not her husband was simply too improper. Even for her. Even for Gracehaven. Yet she couldn't summon a single word of protest. She couldn't summon a single word at all. Utterly speechless, Ivy could only stare up at Mr. Vail's profile as he effortlessly navigated the room, moving with a relentless, driving grace. His body was her shield against the worst of the crowd's jostling, and he weathered it all without so much as a flinch. Like that, he kept her cocooned safely against his side until they finally broke free into the relative seclusion of the gallery's far corner. Only then did he release her, leaving her head spinning with the sudden absence of his warmth as he took a full step backward, establishing a proper distance between them once more. Hands clasped behind his back, he positioned himself between her and the door, obscuring her view of the party's latest arrivals.
Miss Fairwood, I need you to listen to me,
he quietly urged, his tone brisk.
There are a great many things you do not know about me, and now there is no time to explain. But do not fear. Your secret is safe with me.
Her thoughts snagged on the cryptic weight of his promise. Her secret. He could only mean her heritage. But why would she be afraid of him revealing it now? Behind Mr. Vail, the collective murmuring of the gallery surged, rising from an excited hum into a buzzing crescendo. But cutting cleanly through the din came the sound of Mayor Halloway's voice. The fawn's usually jovial tone was entirely gone, replaced by something thin and highly strained. Nervous.
Of course,
the mayor stammered.
But naturally you're most welcome here. What an honor. What an honor. If only we had known you were coming.
Ivy's eyes darted from the impenetrable wall afforded by Mr. Vail's shoulders back up to the man's carefully composed features. Desperately, she searched his gaze for answers. But she found nothing. She opened her mouth, but the swarm of all the many questions she wished to ask tangled uselessly in her throat. I don't understand, she finally managed, shaking her head. Belatedly, her mind finally absorbed that one word in particular the rude woman had used when addressing Elodie. Heiress. Elodie was an heiress.
Vail.
That single word snapped through the gallery, born from a masculine voice as resonant as a struck cello string. A hush immediately fell across the gallery. Mr. Vail's nostrils flared with his sharp intake of breath. For the span of one agonizing heartbeat more, he held her gaze with all of his usual intensity, as if trying to communicate something she couldn't even begin to understand. But when next she blinked, he had already pried his attention away from her and was smoothly swiveling on his heel to face the newcomers. As he turned, he subtly adjusted his stance, clearly determined to keep himself positioned partially in front of her even now, as if to shield her from some unseen threat. Until at last, Ivy finally caught sight of the threat in question. There, standing amidst the parted, whispering crowd, were three of the most painfully beautiful creatures she had ever laid eyes upon. All high elves, just like Mr. Vail and Elodie. But where upon her first meeting of the cold elven man she had been taken by the otherworldly agelessness of his features, she saw now that she had not truly known what otherworldly meant. Not until this very moment. Where Mr. Vail and his daughter were merely lovely, and gloriously so, these newcomers looked as though they had been fashioned directly from moon and starlight. Their impossibly flawless skin glowing with a faint, subtle luminescence. Two of them, a man and a woman, shared cascading locks of pure liquid silver and eyes of the very same startling metallic hue. Their features were so strikingly identical so flawlessly mirrored in the sharp cut of their pale cheekbones and the regal line of their noses, that Ivy instantly assumed they must be kin. They were even dressed to match, both garbed entirely in pristine white, the woman in a flowing diaphanous silk gown, and the man in a snowy, impeccably tailored tailcoat, crisp breeches, and an alabaster cravat. But it was the elf in the centre of their group who commanded the entirety of the room's attention. At first glance, he reminded her vaguely of Mr. Vael. They shared the same midnight black hair and the same pale, striking blue eyes, at the very least. The resemblance ended there. Where Mr. Vail's stoic features were carved from impenetrable marble, this man's visage was something infinitely harder, colder, a jagged monolith of glacial ice. And yet he was draped in the absolute height of masculine finery, a sweeping coat of rich blue velvet, heavy with intricate gold bullion embroidery, a brilliant crimson sash cutting across his chest, and an array of glittering star-shaped medals pinned directly over his heart. Her gaze trailed upward, her attention hitching upon the gleaming golden circlet resting atop the stranger's brow. All the air swept from her lungs at the sight. Though the silver-haired man and woman remained a complete mystery to her, there was no mistaking the sovereign figure standing before her. She knew this man. She had seen his face often enough hanging prominently in the Gracehaven town hall, right alongside the portrait depicting the late, good King Richard. Uncle Orivan, sweet Elodie had named him. She nearly choked on the peal of strangled laughter fighting to escape her throat. Because Uncle Orivan was none other than the Lord Regent himself. Orivan Locke. Chapter 31. Mr. Vail moved with all the exacting precision of a finely tuned timepiece, dipping his head into a shallow bow to the three newcomers, a man merely going through the hollow motions of proper etiquette. A perfect veritas gentleman again. For their part, none of the other high elves paid her a bit of attention. Their piercing stares were reserved solely for Mr. Vail, without a single glance spared her way. Tucked partially behind his back, shamelessly allowing him to shield her with his slightly larger form, Ivy was profoundly relieved by the slight. Let them ignore her.
Your lordship.
Mr. Vail greeted the Lord Regent first, his tone crisp and entirely devoid of warmth.
Montclair.
Without even so much as glancing toward the woman, he tacked on a quieter,
Lady Lysandra.
The Lord Regent returned the greeting with a barely perceptible incline of his head.
Cousin.
In stark contrast, the silver-haired man named Montclair and his companion sank into a far deeper deferential bow and curtsy for Mr. Vail. Your Grace, they murmured in unison. Ivy stared blankly at the lowered heads of the silver-haired elves, her mind stalling as she tried to make sense of the sudden use of that noble title. Surely she had misheard them. Surely they had not just addressed Mr. Vail, a man who merely sold pretty paper, with the title of a duke. She waited for the jest to be revealed, for someone to crack a smile. But nobody laughed. No one corrected the pair. Your Grace. A sudden ringing filled her ears. Slowly, Ivy shifted her gaze to now stare at the back of Mr. Vail's head. He didn't so much as glance her way. Instead, he remarked to the trio without a single ounce of inflection.
How surprised I am to see you here, all the way from the capital. No doubt you dispatched a missive to warn me of your impending arrival, and the letter was simply lost in the post.
Ivy's stomach twisted. The acrid taste of bile rose in the back of her throat. He had paid 3 times what the old Wright place was worth. The Lord Regent was his cousin. He had the initials HGCV elegantly etched into the face of his pocket watch. What an idiot she had been. The truth had been right there in front of her the entire time. HGCV, His Grace, Caelen Vael. Of course he was a duke, and she was a fool. Ivy stumbled a half-step backward, her gaze scouring the wall of staring partygoers, desperately hunting for any gap in the pressing throng, any path by which she could quietly slip away and flee the hot wave of humiliation threatening to pull her under and drown her right then and there. She wanted to laugh at her own stupidity, but she didn't dare draw any attention to herself. Not with the Lord Regent here, and to think that for a single moment she had considered that this man, this duke, might care for her. To think that for a single second she had truly wished he were her secret admirer. Bitterness welled within her, a bitterness she desperately tried to swallow down. Even Fern had abandoned her to this mummer's farce. Perhaps he wasn't here at all. From within the crowd, Marigold, Bastian, and Grandma Evelyn caught her eye, each of their expressions set in tight, poorly masked lines of concern. Beside them, Daphne looked entirely, hopelessly starstruck, her mouth slightly ajar as she gaped at the Lord Regent gracing her engagement party. Felix, however, looked just as out of his depth as she felt. The postmaster fidgeted, nervously smoothing back his hair as if he were suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. Before she could silently appeal to any of them to help her locate an exit, a small, familiar figure broke through the crowd. Elodie. But the little girl wasn't flouncing, as was her usual cheerful norm. Instead, she walked quickly, her head ducked and her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Without a word, she wedged herself into the narrow space between Ivy and Mr. Vael. Instinctively, Ivy reached out and wrapped her fingers around the child's small, gloved hand. Elodie gripped her back, holding on tight. The melodic hum of the high elves conversing, exchanging cool pleasantries, continued to flow around her as her mind raced, trying to calculate a polite way to extract herself from this reunion. Perhaps she could simply take another step backward. Casually so. She could let go of Elodie's hand, drift away, and seamlessly meld into the crowd. Surely none of them would notice her. They were still wholly preoccupied with Mr. Vael, Duke Caelen, or whoever he was.
And who is your charming companion, your Grace?
The question sliced cleanly through her swirling thoughts, shattering her feeble attempts to concoct an escape plan before it could even properly form. Ivy flinched. The silver-haired man, Montclair, was staring directly at her now, his eyebrows raised as he clearly waited for an introduction to be made. Soon, Lady Lysandra's gaze drifted her way as well, though a good deal more reluctantly, as if the other woman had been utterly determined to ignore her existence. When the Lord Regent's attention similarly fell upon her, though, a light sheen of sweat began to pool beneath the drape of her gown. "It's all right," she frantically chanted within the confines of her own mind, forcing herself to hold the Lord Regent's frosty gaze without shrinking away. "There's nothing he can do to you now." But her silent reassurances shriveled to ash within her thoughts when Montclair's face suddenly brightened. The elven man drifted closer, his eyes snagging on the side of her face.
My,
he breathed, curiosity dancing in his quicksilver gaze.
Forgive my boldness in admiring the shape of your ears, my lady. But might you be of human descent?
For a full moment, Ivy's heart stopped beating, her lips parted, an immediate denial already fighting to burst free. But the lie snagged in her swiftly tightening throat.
She is a half-dryad.
Mr. Vail's cold, dark baritone rumbled forth on her behalf. He waved a hand toward her in a gesture of bored dismissal.
This is simply Miss Ivy Fairwood. Miss Fairwood, allow me to introduce you to Lord Lucien Montclair, the Count of Silverpeak, and his sister, Lady Lysandra Montclair, and his lordship, Lord Regent Orevan Locke, of course.
Elodie's small hand tightened around her own, imparting a reassuring squeeze as Ivy breathlessly dipped herself into a weak-kneed curtsy. At the introduction, the curious light in Montclair's eyes dimmed.
I see. A pleasure to meet you all the same, Miss Fairwood.
The smile he offered her seemed genuine enough, but the one delivered to her by his sister was a far colder, sharper sort. "How quaint, Your Grace," the elven woman cooed. "You have hired a little dryad nanny for my dear Elodie." "My dear Elodie?" A spark of irritation flared to life in her chest. Against her better judgment, she firmly corrected the lady. "Actually, I'm an herbalist, and I'm no nanny. I'm simply Miss Elodie's friend." Elodie immediately piped up. "Miss Ivy is Papa's herbalist. She finds him plants so that he can mix his watercolours and inks." In the wake of the child's addendum, the Lord Regent's eyebrow twitched. It was an expression so perfectly mimicking Mr. Vail's own brand of icy displeasure that Ivy finally saw the family resemblance between the two men.
Watercolours and inks?
Lord Regent Orevan whispered, his attention snapping back to Mr. Vail. The man's voice dropped so low with his next words that Ivy struggled to hear what he was saying beyond a hiss of,
"So it is true. You have."
She couldn't catch the rest. But whatever it was that the Lord Regent had just said certainly made the line of Mr. Vail's shoulders stiffen further. The rhythmic clatter of hooves against the floor sounded through the air. The tight circle of onlookers parted, and Mayor Halloway practically bounded into the clearing provided, his wife trailing nervously at his side. Sweeping into a bow, Mayor Halloway asked,
"Did I hear someone wondering if we have any humans here in Gracehaven?"
Behind him, 3 more familiar figures emerged, Daphne, Felix, and Grandma Evelyn.
"If so, you have certainly not journeyed in vain."
With a grand, sweeping flourish of his arm, as if he were unveiling a prized, mythical exhibit at a travelling carnival, the faun introduced,
"May I present Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell and her grandson, Mr. Felix Caldwell, hailing directly from the human kingdom of the United States. And my dear daughter, of course, Daphne Halloway, soon to be married to Mr. Caldwell."
If Grandma Evelyn felt at all slighted by being paraded about like a spectacle, she certainly didn't show it. Rising flawlessly to the occasion, the older woman offered a stately twirl of her skirts before sinking into a masterfully executed curtsy. Beside her, Felix dipped into a courtly bow of his own. All at once, the crushing weight of the royal party's attention shifted, snapping away from her to rivet entirely upon the Caldwells instead. Lord Montclair let loose an unabashed gasp of pure delight as he stepped forward and gently took Grandma Evelyn's outstretched hand. With an air of absolute reverence, he bowed low over her knuckles.
"What an honour, dear lady,"
the silver-haired elf breathed, his eyes wide with genuine wonder.
"Truly one hears rumours, but to see full-blooded humans still here in Luminara, it does warm the heart. Lysandra, do come and meet them."
Lady Lysandra's icy veneer finally cracked, her curiosity clearly overriding her haughtiness as she drifted past her brother to inspect Felix. Barely daring to breathe, she looked back toward the Lord Regent, waiting for him to join in with Mayor Halloway's theatrics. But Orevan Locke did not move to greet the humans alongside his noble companions. His glacial blue gaze remained locked in a silent battle of wills with Mr. Vail. But at least he had completely forgotten about her. Under the cover of Montclair's joyous chatter and the excited murmurs of the surrounding crowd, taking pleasure in seeing such esteemed guests delighting in their own brand of Gracehaven hospitality, Ivy leaned down and hastily whispered into Elodie's ear, "I must go, but I will find you again later, I promise. I want to meet your new Lindenvale friends." Elodie looked up at her, her eyes pooling with disappointment. Her mouth parted as if she desperately wanted to protest, to beg Ivy to stay. But after a moment more, the little girl swallowed and gave a quick, solemn nod instead. Chest aching, Ivy imparted one last squeeze to Elodie's hand before she pulled away. She didn't want to leave her alone amongst the pack of high elf wolves, but she couldn't stand there for a single second longer. Without sparing a backward glance, Ivy finally turned and slipped silently into the swishing sea of the crowd, fleeing as fast as her slippers could carry her. She needed to get out of there. She needed air. Keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the far wall, she gently wove past the Whitfields. The family of fable rabbits stood on their toes, their long, furred ears twitching with excitement as they fought to get a better view of the visitors. A few paces later, she dipped her head in a quick, distracted greeting to Pastor Amos, not even waiting to hear his warm hello before pressing relentlessly onward. Finally, the suffocating wall of silk and broadcloth thinned. She broke free of the densest part of the crowd, the grand double doors leading out of the gallery rising in the near distance like a beacon of freedom. She was almost there. But then Marigold, Bastian, and Sir Charles suddenly materialized in her path, forming a blockade of deeply worried faces.
I say, are you quite all right?
Sir Charles asked.
Do you wish to leave?
Bastian pressed, stepping forward as if ready to escort her home himself if she merely asked. Is there anything we can do? Marigold swiftly added with a frown. Ivy's steps faltered, her chest heaving. She loved her friends dearly, more than anything, but right now, the sheer force of their well-meaning concern was simply another weight pressing down on her lungs, making it difficult for her to breathe. She couldn't explain what had just happened. She couldn't untangle the confusing revelation of his grace when her mind was still spinning so wildly with the realization that Fern was not here. That despite all of his promises, he had not come. She just desperately wished to be alone. She needed time to think. I'm fine, she insisted, forcing her tone to remain measured and firm, refusing to let her voice crack over the syllables. Thank you. I just need a moment to myself. After a beat, she softly added, but please do thank Mayor Halloway for me. His distraction was most perfectly timed. The trio exchanged a hesitant look, but after a long moment's pause, her friends reluctantly stepped aside, parting to let her pass. Just let us know if you need anything, Ivy, Mary murmured in way of farewell. But Ivy was already moving again. Without another word, she surged past them, rushing toward the double doors as quickly as she could, without breaking into a full, scandalous run. Chapter 32. Utter darkness drenched the gardens by the time she burst through the glass-paned doors leading out onto the grounds. It seemed that clouds had rolled in during the party, blotting out the stars and the moon above Ashdown Park. A peal of thunder rumbled in the distance. Ivy gathered her skirts into her hands and fled blindly into the night, her slippers crunching against the winding gravel pathways underfoot. She didn't care where she was going, only that she put as much distance between herself and the party as possible. Manicured shrubs rose up on either side of her, little more than a series of shapeless, hulking shadows, leading the way toward the towering silhouette of the estate's grand hedge maze looming in the distance. The damp air burned in her lungs. A humiliating sting flared behind her eyes. No, she fiercely ordered herself, blinking rapidly against the rush of moisture. She would not cry. She absolutely refused to cry. Why should she cry? Because the Lord Regent was here? What did it matter anymore? Because Mr. Vael had masked his true identity and made her feel a fool? Because Fern had never shown? Her heart gave a pathetic lurch. Was she truly fighting tears over a man who had never even possessed the courage to make himself known to her in person? A man who had so boldly promised on parchment to claim her first dance, only to vanish into the shadows when she had needed him most. Suddenly, the string of pearls resting against her collarbone, the very pearls Fern had gifted her, felt impossibly heavy. They were no longer a romantic token. They were a collar meant to mock her for daring to dream. A suffocating weight dragging against her skin. Ivy skidded to a halt, gravel scattering sharply beneath her. With shaking hands, she reached up and fumbled at the clasp at the nape of her neck. When the metal refused to yield, she simply wrenched the necklace free. The thread snapped. With a breathless heave, she flung it blindly into the dark labyrinth of the gardens. The very moment the pearls vanished into the night, a choked sob finally broke from her throat, tearing past all her careful defences. She was being ridiculous. She was far too old for these theatrics. Yet she could not stop crying. Why could she not stop crying? Wrapping her arms tightly around her middle, she glanced back over her shoulder toward the Halloway Manor. High above the sprawling, darkened lawns, the tall windows of the upper gallery still glittered with cheerful golden light. The muffled, lively strains of the string quartet spilled out into the night once more, the joyful ambiance seeming to actively mock her sudden melancholy. But she soon realized that looking back was a terrible mistake. The tightness in her chest simply magnified tenfold as her wet gaze hitched upon the unmistakable figure descending from the terrace. Even in the darkness she knew him, the man prowling down the gravel pathway, cutting through the shadows at a brisk, relentless clip directly toward her. The Duke. "Leave me alone," she shouted, her voice cracking over the words. Words that were instantly swallowed by another growl of thunder rolling across the darkened horizon. A droplet of rain struck the bridge of her nose. The man she had only ever known as the cold, aloof Mr. Vael did not so much as falter. He simply continued to stride down the gravel path, his pursuit absolute and unrelenting. With a gasp, Ivy spun on her heel and bolted for the towering entrance of the hedge maze, diving headlong into the yawning, ink-black shelter of its corridors. She and Daphne had spent countless summer afternoons in this labyrinth as girls, gleefully hiding from the fawn's strict governess for hours on end. She had been so certain the twisting pathways were permanently etched into her memory. But she was wrong. Darkness and panic twisted her sense of direction and warped her memory. She took a sharp left, her skirts swishing wildly around her ankles, then a blind right, only to slide to a sudden halt. Before her rose an impenetrable towering wall of tightly woven hedge, a dead end.
Miss Fairwood.
The Duke's dark baritone cracked through the night, the sound bouncing off the leafy corridors. He was close. Too close. What game was he playing? Why would a man of his high standing move to Gracehaven and play at being a shopkeep? Bitterness twisted her stomach. No doubt this was all a lark to him, a passing fancy. He was a mere nobleman on holiday, and she and all her friends had played right into his ruse. Trapped, Ivy pressed her hands flat against the dense foliage of the dead end. "Please," she whispered to the hedges themselves, a plea born from the depths of her half-dryad soul. Instantly, the hedges all around her shuddered. The earth beneath her feet gently vibrated. Shooting a terrified glance over her shoulder, another gasp caught in her throat as the empty pathway she had just run down suddenly writhed with new life. Thick branches of yew stretched and twisted together, choking the corridor with a dense, impassable wall of greenery that simply had not been there a moment ago. Before her, the dead end parted. The ancient roots shifted and groaned, pulling back to reveal a brand new path. Gathering up her skirts again, she plunged down the newly formed corridor, pushing herself to run further. Faster. More droplets of rain struck her as she fled, dappling her brow. Her cheeks. She didn't make it far. The wind suddenly shifted. An unnatural gale shrieked at her back, howling through the maze and drowning out the rumble of distant thunder. It ripped through the labyrinth, violently thrashing the tall hedges until the leaves hissed like angry serpents. With a cry of alarm, Ivy threw her arms up to shield her face, pressing herself flat against the nearest wall of the maze. She could only stare in wide-eyed, breathless horror as that ferocious, icy wind cleaved a clean path straight through the dense greenery directly before her, ripping the branches apart to carve out a jagged archway. The wind died as quickly as it had come, and from the swirling shadows of that newly formed archway, the Duke stepped through, his eyes instantly locking with hers. Even now, surrounded by the dark walls of the labyrinth, even now with the cold rain beginning to drum against her in earnest, it was the sheer, crushing weight of his gaze that struck the remaining air straight from her lungs. She hated it. She hated this effect he had upon her, the treacherous flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat, the way her body instinctively swayed toward him despite the storm of confused emotions warring in her mind.
Miss Fairwood, I must speak with you.
Mr. Vael rasped, taking a single step toward her. The raggedness of his tone matched the torn edges of the yew branches he had just ripped apart. "And yet, I can think of nothing I wish to say to you," she breathlessly insisted before darting to the side, attempting to slip past his frame and escape through the jagged archway. He moved faster than any man had any right to move. His hand shot out, catching her wrist with a touch so maddeningly gentle, so at odds with the exasperation lacing his voice when he snapped,
"Ivy, listen to me."
She froze. The startling sound of her given name falling from his lips hung suspended in the storm-charged air between them. The fight slowly drained from her limbs, leaving her merely rooted to the swiftly dampening earth. The moment she stopped trying to flee from him, an audible exhale shuddered from the Duke's chest. His gaze traced downward, catching on the sight of his hand cupping her wrist. She waited for him to let her go, to return to his stiff posture of standing at a polite distance, his hands clasped behind his back. But he didn't move. He didn't relinquish his gentle hold on her.
In vain have I struggled.
He grated out instead, the words stiff, rehearsed.
But my feelings can no longer be suppressed.
Ivy could only stare up at him, her mind spinning so fast she could hardly process the words. What was he saying? The rain fell harder, faster, cold droplets sliding down the back of her neck and catching in her eyelashes, blurring her vision. Still scandalously holding her wrist, cupping it as if it were something truly precious, he angled his body closer to hers. His slightly taller frame became her shield again, protecting her from the worst of the rising storm.
I have fought against my better judgment,
he continued, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper that was nearly lost beneath the drumming of the rain.
Against my duty, against every expectation placed upon my family name. I have tried to walk away, but instead, I've simply walked away from all I've ever known. I have tried to remind myself of the impossible absurdity of this.
He gestured vaguely around them with his free hand, as if to encompass the maze, or perhaps simply all of Gracehaven itself.
Of allowing myself to lose all sense, to forget all the promises I ever made in this provincial edge of the world. A town I had thought to be completely bereft of proper society or consequence.
Provincial, bereft of proper society or consequence. His proud words lashed against her already raw nerves, an insult directed not only at her, but at all her friends. Her neighbours, the people who had welcomed him and his daughter so happily, so readily. The people she cared for most in the world. That ringing returned to her ears, drowning out the rest of his speech. Fury ignited in her blood, a white-hot spark that instantly burned away every ounce of self-pity she had been wallowing in mere minutes before. "How dare you?" she cut in, not letting him finish. She couldn't let him finish. She couldn't stomach a single second more of his insufferable arrogance. Pulling free of his grasp, she took a full step backward and flung at him. "How dare you speak so lowly of a town that has welcomed you and your daughter with open arms? We have shown you nothing but Christian hospitality, and yet you still view us with such scorn and call us provincial." The Duke's jaw visibly clenched.
Miss Fairwood,
he exhaled, carefully enunciating each word.
you must listen to me. You do not understand.
"Oh, I do believe I understand you perfectly, Your Grace," she insisted over the rising patter of the rain, her hands balling into fists. "No doubt this was all a rather amusing pastime for you, some little holiday in a country village playing at being a stationer, so you could eventually return to Veritas to tell all your well-to-do friends, like the Montclairs, about how provincial we are." A humorless laugh burst from her throat. "No wonder you were so insistent with me that you had no intention to take a wife here. How unfortunate that would be for you to put down roots when you were simply passing through." Her words spurred him into motion. He closed the distance between them in a single, ground-devouring step. In the rain-swept darkness, he seemed to loom over her.
No.
He growled, his demeanour far fiercer than she had ever seen it before.
That is not true. You do not understand me at all.
Ivy's pulse leapt, fluttering wildly at his nearness, and the fresh rumble of thunder rolling across the sky, vibrating straight into her chest. The rain pounded against her, slicking her hair, soaking her gown. She should have retreated indoors. She should have simply left him out there with his fierce demeanour and his foul mood. But she couldn't retreat. Not now. "Then enlighten me," she bit out, tilting her chin up to defiantly meet his shadowed gaze. "Tell me I am wrong about you, Your Grace. Tell me you didn't lie to us all about just who you are. Tell me you haven't been masquerading as a mere widower when you are actually a duke and the cousin of the Lord Regent, no less." Her bitterness swelled, urging her onward, the words tumbling from her throat as she laughed again without a single lick of humour. "Tell me you didn't just Sweep in here with all your extravagant wealth and purchase the shop I had spent a year of my life saving for, simply so that you could play at being a shopkeeper." A blinding fork of lightning split the heavens. The brilliant white flashed through the narrow corridor of the maze into stark relief, catching the sharp, unforgiving lines of the Duke's face, the smouldering burn of his eyes. A singular emotion etched itself across his visage within that fleeting illumination. Pain. She had clearly wounded him with her words. The white-hot shield of her anger shattered at once, leaving her entirely too aware of her current predicament, standing in the middle of the Halloway's ruined hedge maze with Mr. Vael, becoming more soaked to the bone with each moment that passed. All her fury bled from her, leaving her trembling. Hollow. He had followed her out into this storm. He had abandoned his Veritas friends, the Lord Regent himself, to chase her through the night. And she had scorned him. She had insulted him.
"And here I thought you, of all people,"
he murmured, his baritone dropping to a dangerous, freezing hush,
"would have understood why I chose to hide behind a mask, Miss Flores."
He flung her father's name at her. Upon his lips, it sounded less like a proud heritage and more like an insult. Ivy couldn't help but flinch away, a sickening weight plummeting to the very bottom of her stomach. She swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat, her lips parting to speak, to apologize, to ask him to properly explain himself. But the damage was already done. The fleeting vulnerability that had cracked his stoic facade vanished entirely. In the next moment, he pulled away from her. The scant foot of space now standing between them felt like an impossibly vast chasm. A strange sense of loss settled over her as she watched him smooth back his rain-slicked hair and tug his damp waistcoat into place, as if trying to erase any lingering evidence of the man who had followed her out into the rain. As if that man no longer existed.
"Worry not,"
he coldly reassured her.
"I will trouble you no longer."
Without so much as glancing her way, he uttered a final,
"Goodbye."
He didn't wait for her to reply. The Duke simply turned on his heel and strode away, his silhouette swiftly melting into the shadows of the ruined yew. Ivy's body moved of its own accord. Her slipper scraped against the wet grass as she took a single, staggering step after him, her hand lifting instinctively into the empty, rain-drenched air. Wait. That was what she should have said. But the plea shriveled in her tightening throat. It was too late. Only the low rumble of thunder and the cold, relentless drumming of the rain remained with her out there in the darkness. Caelen Vael was already gone.